Welcome to the new session of Programming for Problem Solving. The topic of the day is loop statements. Now, why do we need loop statements? When there is a need to repeat a set of compound statements for a finite number of times, it can be implemented with the help of loop statement. Now, what happens is that a C program is executed in a sequential order. And what do we mean by a sequential order? The statements are executed one after the other in a sequential manner. But sometimes there is a need to execute a set of compound statements repeatedly. For that, the C programming provides us with a provision of loop statement that help us to achieve that. Now, how many categories of loop statement we have? Broadly, the loop statements are divided into two. One is called entry controlled and one is called exit control. Now, exit control refers to where the exit condition, the condition to terminate the loop is after the body of the loop or after the compound statements inside the loop. Whereas in case of entry control, the condition is before the body of the loop. So that means whether we are going to execute a set of statements or not is decided beforehand. And in case of exit control, the execution of the body takes place first and then the condition is checked whether or not to continue with the loop. So the first type of loop statement we have is called a for loop. Now, what is a for loop? A for loop is used when there is a need to execute a set of compound statements repeatedly over a finite number of times. For loop is preferred when it is known in advance as to how many times a block of statements need to be iterated. The idea is very simple. First thing is that you use any type of loop statement. It is only usable or it is only practicable if you are going to implement it over a finite number of times. You cannot use a loop statement over an infinite period. So that obviously means that the logic of the program is wrong. So when we are talking about executing a set of compound statements over a finite number of time, that naturally means with every step you are moving one step closer to that number. Once that number is over, that means you are done with the repetition and you can exit the statement. Now, when you should prefer the for loop, there are two choices. One is that you already know beforehand that this is the number of times that you are going to repeat a set of statements. And one is when the number of times the statement is to be repeated depends upon certain condition during the execution. That means you are not actually aware of how many times that iteration will continue. So in case you know it in advance, you prefer the for loop. Please remember the choice of the word is prefer. It is not mandatory. That means in case you do not know beforehand that how many times the iteration will be repeated, you can use the for loop as well. So it is about the preference. Syntax of the for loop. Syntax of the for loop is very simple. The for keyword is used and then within the braces, three components are mentioned. The first one is called the assignment or the initialization. The second one is the condition and the third one is the increment or the decrement. It is then followed by a block of compound statements. Now, what do you mean by these three parts? Assignment or initialization basically means if you want to repeat a set of statements, then from where we are going to start, what is the condition, up to which condition we are going to repeat it, and then what will be the increment. Generally it is one, but there is no hard and fast rule. It can be two or three as well. Now, how these three components are actually uh, taken care of, or how these components actually play a role when you execute a program, for that you can look at this table below. It is a very important table. For example, if you want to execute a set of statement for 10 times, then the whole execution is divided into two categories. The first is the first iteration, and all the remaining 9 iterations are considered to be the remaining iteration. When you run the first iteration, what will happen is the assignment will be done. So the first job is to assign or initialize the value. Then we are going to check the condition. So once the initialization is done and the condition is checked, we do not, or the compiler does not perform any increment or decrement. So you move to execute the compound statements for the first iteration. Once the first iteration is over, when you reach the second iteration, then the first thing to happen is that we increment or decrement the value, and then again check the condition. If the condition is true, we again execute the set of compound statements, and if the condition is false, then you come out of the for loop. So basically, what does it mean? That the condition will be checked always. Initialization will be done only in the case of first iteration, and increment and decrement is done for all the remaining parts. So this is a simple example, a program where you want to print the numbers from 1 to 5. So you are using a for loop. A variable to that will be used in this program is I. So you can see here I is equals to 1, because we want to print from 1 to 5. We will start from I is equals to 1. What is the condition? The condition is I less than equals to 5. So this loop will be repeated till the value of I is either less than or equal to 5. Now what is the increment? Now you want to print all the numbers from 1 to 5. That means the increment will be of 1. If you wanted to print the odd numbers, then the increment would have been of 2. And what you want to print? You want to print the value of I. Now let's have a look at the table below to see how the execution actually takes place. In iteration number 1, the value of I is initialized to 1. Now what is the condition? I less than equals to 5, which is true. That means the compound statement will be executed and the output will be displayed 1. During the iteration number 2, the value of I will be incremented to 2. The condition is again true and the output comes out to be 2. So this whole process will be repeated till the value of I becomes 5. Now when the value of I becomes 5, 5 is less than equal to 5, which is true, and the output will be displayed on the screen, which is 5. Now when we reach or we increment the value of I for the next iteration, the value of I becomes 6. Now check the condition. 6 is less than equal to 5, which is false. 6 is not less than equal to 5. That means the condition will return false and this loop will terminate. The next is nested for loop. We have already studied this concept of nested structure in our previous lectures. Now, what do we understand by the concept nested? Nested means some structure inside the same structure. So what is nested for loop? A for loop within another for loop. So we have created a for loop. So we are going to use another for loop as a part of its compound statement. Nested for loop refers to the structure with for loop inside the body of another for loop. Now why we do that? Basically, when you are using a simple for loop, you have a one variable and the increment of it is also in a one direction. So you have one variable and you increment that variable by 1. So you are moving in a one direction. Now suppose that you want to move in two directions, then that cannot be implemented with the help of simple for loop. For that you need a nested for loop. For example, if you want to display a matrix, now what is the first thing that you want to do is you want to display the contents of all the elements in the row number 1. So that means you need a for loop to display all the elements in the first row. But then you want to move to the second row. Then you want to move to the third row. So that means step by step you will print all the elements of each row in the array. So for that you need a nested for loop. One for loop will manage the printing of all elements in a particular row, whereas the second for loop will keep track of how many rows have been printed. Syntax for the nested for loop is very simple. As you can see that there is a for loop, and within the body of the outer for loop, you have an inner for loop. Rest the syntax is same as of a for loop. The only thing to remember is that in case of a nested for loop, you have a for loop as part of the block of statements of another for loop. Now this is a simple program, as you can see on the screen. The idea is to show the execution. That means in every step whether the outer loop is executing and when the inner loop is executing. You can see in the outer loop it will be executed 2 times, and the inner for loop will be executed 2 times. Now because the inner loop is inside the outer loop, so that means the inner loop will be executed twice for one iteration of outer loop. The things will be clear when you look at the table below. Let us start with it. Initially, the outer loop will start as iteration number 1. The value of I will become 1. So as you can see that the iteration of the outer loop in the table, it states 1. Inner loop hasn't yet started. The condition is true, yes. The value of I becomes 1, and the message that will be displayed on the screen is that we are executing the outer loop. Now we will start with the execution of the inner loop. The value of j will be incremented to 1. As you can see in the second row of the table, the inner loop iteration starts with first iteration. The condition is true, the value of I is unchanged, and the value of j becomes 1. And what will be the message that will be displayed on the screen? Inner loop. Then the value of j becomes 2. And as you can see, again the message displayed on the screen is inner loop. When the value of j becomes 3, the inner loop condition returns false, which means that you come out of the inner loop and then you reach the outer loop. The iteration of, or the second iteration of the outer loop starts. The condition returns true because the value of I is 2, which is equal to 2. So the message displayed on the screen will be outer loop. Now once again the inner loop will be executed for the second iteration of the outer loop. So the message that will be displayed on the screen is inner loop, and then the inner loop will be terminated, and in the end the outer loop will be terminated. So what's the idea here? The idea here is that for each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop will be executed fully. So that means if you have an outer loop that will be executed for the 3 iterations, that means the inner loop will be executed completely for 3 times. Next is while loop. Now while loop is preferred when the number of times block of statements need to be iterated is not known in advance. Like I said, it is all about the preference. It is not about whether a for loop can do something which the while loop cannot. The answer to this question is that everything that a for loop can do can also be done with the help of the while loop, but it is just the preference. So when we prefer a while loop, we prefer a while loop when the number of times an iteration is to be or number of times the compound statements are to be executed is not known in the advance. What is the syntax of the while loop? It is different from the for loop. In the for loop we have 3 components, and in the while loop we have only one component, which is the condition. So that means initialization and the increment have to be given exclusively as part of the simple statements. Now as you can see in this program, the loop will continue till the value of ch is equal to y. So obviously initially the value of ch must have been given y, so the condition is true. The message displayed on the screen is hello world, and then within the loop the user is asked to enter whether it wants to continue with the program or not. The user has two options, y or n. If the user enters y, then the value of ch becomes y. That means the condition is true, and the iteration or the loop will continue with the next iteration. Now, how many times will this loop iterate? It will depend upon the input given by the user. For every y given by the user as input, the loop will continue. Anytime the user enters a non-y value, the loop will terminate. As you can see in the output example, the user enters y twice. So the first time the output is there, the user enters y, second time, and then third time. And after the third time the hello world is printed, the user enters no. Once the user enters n, the loop is terminated. The next is an exit controlled loop statement. The first two examples were of the entry controlled, and this is an example of exit control. What is the difference between the entry and exit? As I have already told you, that in exit control, the condition comes after the group of compound statements. So that means the compound statements are executed first and then the condition is checked. So what impact does it have on the execution of the loop? As you can see at the bottom, it states that do while statement is preferred in cases when there is a need to execute the block of statements at least once. Now, in case of entry controlled loop, if the condition is false in the very beginning, that means the set of compound statements are not executed even once. But because in case of exit controlled, the compound statement comes first, that means it is ensured that the compound statements are executed at least once. तो इसका मतलब ये श्योर है कि कम से कम एक बार आपकी कंपाउंड स्टेटमेंट चलेंगी ही चलेंगी इन केस ऑफ एग्जिट कंट्रोल, और ऐसी कोई भी गारंटी जो है वो एंट्री कंट्रोल में नहीं। तो सिंटैक्स क्या है डू वाइल का? सबसे ऊपर हम लोग कीवर्ड यूज करेंगे डू, उसके बाद आपके आएंगे ब्लॉक ऑफ स्टेटमेंट्स, जैसे ही क्लोजिंग करली ब्रेसेस आएगी उसके बाद हम लोग अपना कीवर्ड लिखेंगे व्हाइल और उसके साथ लगाएंगे कंडीशन। और एक और डिफरेंस है कि कंडीशन के बाद वी आर गोइंग टू यूज द सेमीकोलन। सो व्हाट इज द सिंटैक्स ऑफ द डू व्हाइल लूप? We start with the do keyword followed by the block of statements and then the while condition followed by the semicolon. Now this semicolon, because there is no set of compound statements after this condition, so that is why they are using the semicolon. Now the example of the do while loop is absolutely same to the previous program that we have seen. Now there is no difference in the program. Only thing that has been changed is that the while statement comes after the block of compound statements. So that means the hello world will be executed at least once. Now where the difference will lie? Let us suppose that if the value of ch is not initialized to y, अगर आपने अपने प्रोग्राम पर कहीं ऊपर ch को y के साथ इनिशियलाइज नहीं किया है, तो while लूप में आपकी एक भी आइट्रेशन नहीं चलेगी, लेकिन डू वाइल लूप में इसका फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा क्योंकि ब्लॉक ऑफ स्टेटमेंट्स बिना कंडीशन चेक किए ही एग्जीक्यूट किए जा सकते हैं। तो दैट मीन्स कि अगर आप वाइल लूप यूज कर रहे हैं तो आपको पहले से ही ch को y के साथ इनिशियलाइज करना पड़ेगा, लेकिन ऐसी कोई जरूरत नहीं है व्हेन यू आर यूजिंग द डू वाइल लूप। नाउ within the loop statements there are two statements that are specially designed for use in the loop statements to control the way we exit from the loops. These two are called the jump statements. Now what are these jump statements? In case you are executing a loop and there is some condition based upon which you need to exit that loop without completing the all the iterations, then you use these two statements. The first statement is called the break statement. Now what is a break statement? The break statement is used to exit from the loop structure. Now anytime a break statement is executed within the loop will terminate. The program will not terminate. Let's make it very clear, the program will not terminate, only the execution of that loop will terminate. Now what happens when the execution of the loop is terminate? The next line to be executed is the one which is followed by the loop. As you can see in the figure on the top on the left hand side, while statement has been used. Now, based upon some condition, if that condition is true, the break statement has been called. And once the break statement is executed, as you can see, if you follow the arrow, the next line to be executed is after the while condition. The same is with the do while. If the break statement is executed, you come out of the while loop. And same is with the for. Now there is one question that obviously will arises in the mind is, what if you are using the concept of the nested for loop? That means there is a for loop inside another for loop, and if you use the break statement inside the inner for loop, what will happen? Will the loop in only the inner loop will terminate, or both the inner and the outer loop will terminate? The answer to this question is that only the inner loop or the execution of the inner loop will terminate. In case you are using the break statement inside the body of the outer loop, then both the inner and outer will terminate. The next statement is continue statement. What is a continue statement? A continue statement is used to continue with the next iteration of the loop, skipping the execution of all remaining statements in the current iteration. Now, what is this? Basically, if you have 10 statements inside the body of the for loop, let us suppose that the continue statement is written in the fourth line based upon some condition. If the continue statement is executed, the program actually skips all the remaining 6 lines in that loop and it starts with the next iteration. As you can see in the figure, when the continue statement actually executes based upon the result of the text expression, if you follow the arrow takes you back to the first line of the while loop, which means that now we are starting with the next iteration. तो हो क्या रहा है जब हम लोग continue statement को यूज करते हैं? तो continue statement जब एग्जीक्यूट किया जाता है किसी भी for loop के अंदर, तो आपकी जो करंट आइट्रेशन चल रही थी वो टर्मिनेट हो जाती है एंड यूर प्रोग्राम एग्जीक्यूशन मूव्स टू द नेक्स्ट आइट्रेशन. अगर आप आइट्रेशन नंबर 2 चला रहे हैं तो आइट्रेशन नंबर 2 उसी टाइम खत्म हो जाएगी जब कंटिन्यू स्टेटमेंट एनकाउंटर होगी और आइट्रेशन नंबर 3 जो है वो स्टार्ट हो जाएगी. तो व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस बिटवीन ब्रेक एंड कंटिन्यू? ब्रेक के अंदर आप लूप की एग्जीक्यूशन से ही टर्मिनेट हो जाते हैं, यानी उसकी एग्जीक्यूशन से बाहर आ जाते हैं. लेकिन कंटिन्यू में आप उस लूप की एग्जीक्यूशन से बाहर नहीं आते हैं, लेकिन सिर्फ और सिर्फ उस आइट्रेशन को स्किप करके आप नेक्स्ट आइट्रेशन पर पहुंच जाते हैं. I hope that you have understood the basic knowledge, or you have gained the basic knowledge of the various loops that are used in C program, and we will see how these can be implemented with the help of different programs in the practical session, so the things will become more clearer to you. Thank you. I hope you were able to understand the concepts of the loop in this lecture, and then we will continue with the next lecture in the form of practical. Thank you.